friends, and welcome back to another exciting virtual tour of some of the best ghost stories from this region. And it has been a while since I've done one of these live broadcasts, so please let me know if it's working. But we are going to go over some of my favorite local ghost stories. And originally, I was thinking that I was going to do all of Washington State, but I didn't really even get out of Pierce County, I think, just going over some of the ones that I think need to be told the most. If you have questions or comments along the way, please let me know. I'm very excited to get into this today. And yeah, thank you. Yesterday was my birthday, so pretty nice, pretty nice. I love the Halloween season. It's my absolute favorite. I don't know if that comes through, but here's the best of the best. So of all the ghost stories in Tacoma, Pierce County, I think some of these you'll probably know, some of them you may have never heard before, and my aim is to get a balance of those two. But the very first one I want to tell you about is the Help Me Ghost. And if you are familiar, this house is in the southern Tacoma area on South 8th, and this was constructed in 1910. And it didn't really get a lot of notoriety as a home. It had basically the same family occupy it from 1910 until the late 60s, when it got changed over to a woman named Mrs. Frances Pacinda. And Pacinda moved into the home in October 1970, right after it had been unoccupied for a period of time after the previous owner had died. And Mrs. Pacinda was a widow. She moved into the home, 41-year-old widow, and brought her daughter with her. And her daughter, Linda, was also a widow who brought her children with her. So there was this household of children and widows living together in this home where the previous owners from 1910 had originally died. And pretty quickly on, they were having a variety of strange things happen in the house. And at first, they didn't think anything of it, but it was like a scratching sound, and that it would follow them through the walls, and they could hear it in the attic up above them when they were sleeping in their bedrooms at night. And Frances at first thought that it might be mice inside the wall. They had some contractors come over and take a look at everything, and they ruled it out. They're like, well, it's probably not mice because they've just blown new insulation into the top of this building and inside the walls. So maybe there's like an animal crawling around outside at night that you're hearing. But the more that they lived there, the longer that they were there, the more the scratching became intense and directly above them, to the point where both Frances and her daughter would be going to sleep at night, and around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, they'd be woken up first by this sound of scratching, almost like something was being dragged across the attic floor above them, and that it would stop directly above their bed. And then they would just get this feeling like something was wrong or they were being watched. And this went on for months. And then they were quick enough to rule it out. It eventually got to the point where Mrs. Pacinda and her daughter were both experiencing things where the doors would start slamming. Like it'd be the bedroom door would slam closed, then open up, slam closed again 3 or 4 times while they walked from the living room to the back of the house to see what was going on. And when they would get there, nobody in the room. It was also getting to the point where they would go out, they would come back towards the evening, and when they would pull into the driveway, the light would be on in Frances Pacinda's bedroom. And then they would be like, oh, that's really strange. We left the light on. Go into the house, go backwards. By the time they got to the bedroom, all the lights would be off in the house. And it got notoriety in Tacoma. I'm going to blow up this article here. People were talking about it because there were a lot of incidents where they were calling the police because they thought maybe somebody had broken into the house. And each of these widows, each of these women at one point had had an experience where they thought that they saw somebody standing behind them in a mirror or walking down the hallway, and they would just catch the fleetest glimpse of them. At one point, Frances was getting out of the shower in the morning, And it looked like the bathroom door had been opened while she was in there. And she swore what looked like somebody's eye, like the face of somebody staring through the crack in the door, and then it passed through and went down the hallway. But nobody was in the house with her. She absolutely freaked out. Nothing was ever found in there, though. This goes on for years. They constantly want to leave the home because they feel like there's definitely something in that house watching them, and it had a very negative presence. Like it would move things around or throw them against the wall. But all their money was tied up in this new home. And as two widows in the 1970s, there wasn't a lot of opportunity for them to go anywhere. I end up looking into this more and more. And it eventually got to the point where Francis's daughter, Linda, said that she heard someone screaming in the living room in the middle of the night, saying, "Come out and help me." And it sounded like her mom's voice. So she goes out, she looks out in the living room, nothing. But she keeps hearing this screaming sound, "Come out and help me, come out and help me." And it sounds like her mom's voice. She goes in the bedroom, mom's not there at all. She goes around, makes sure her kids are safe, never finds her mom. But next morning, she's like, what was happening? Talks to her mom about it. And she says that she had had a dream that someone was screaming for help, but just woke up in her bed like normal. And after a week of this happening sporadically on and off, she eventually wakes up one night, young Linda, goes out after hearing this woman screaming for help. And there in the middle of the living room is her mom, eyes closed, dead asleep, screaming for help. No idea. No idea this day. And the only thing that I can find is that when that home was constructed in 1910, it was made for the Johnson family, husband and wife, and they continued to live into it until both of them passed away. That was the first and only owner before the Pacinda family ended up moving in there. And over the years, the city owned it for a period of time after the Pacinda family, Francis in particular, died. House turned over, and then the city owned it for a while, and then a construction company before it got flipped and sold. But they were having handprints show up inside the house, contractor dust in the attic, on glass in the windows, and always thought that someone had broken into the house and was just mucking around with their gear, maybe going through the tools or something, but never found anything. That is absolutely one of my favorite Tacoma ghost stories, and the documentation on it is absolutely extraordinary. Now, if you know anything about the Johnson family that lived there originally, please let me know, because I haven't been able to find really any cause of death. Just says that they passed away peacefully at the end of their lives there. Worth noting. And you could still pull up, yeah, Francine Pacinda eventually passed away at 47, right? So she only lived in that home for 6 years. She moved in when she was 41, died when she was 47, and then that house turned over. Now, let me talk about one of my most requested ghost stories in the region here, Gus the Ghost in Old City Hall. Now, if you've been in Tacoma for any period of time, no doubt someone has talked to you about Gus, the resident ghost that apparently enjoys living in Old City Hall. And there's a lot to suggest that Old City Hall would be haunted, right? Like, this structure was constructed in 1893 and served not only as the city council offices, library, municipal district, but also the jail. From 1893 until this was shuttered in the 1950s, there were 16 jail cells underground in this building, and they were the city jail. Some of the most dangerous serial killers in Tacoma's history have been housed in that jail down there. And then this building was just abandoned, empty. In the 1970s, early 80s, they were trying to do, like almost a mini mall experience with this. There's some local businesses and restaurants in there, including what I'm told was a very swanky bar music venue down in the old jail cells in the basement there. But over those years, there were continuous sightings of ghosts inside the building. And in particular, the legend of Gus really started to get some legs. That Gus was a rule-breaking anti-authority, kind of cheeky ghost that really enjoyed getting handsy with people. So it was a rite of passage. It was almost a hazing ceremony for new wait staff in the various bars and restaurants to have to work the late shift, and that Gus would throw bottles, glasses, get all like touchy-feely with these people until either they were accepted, or if Gus never liked them, eventually they would have to leave. And this goes on for quite some time. But there's never been anything that I've found to suggest like that a Gus ever passed through this building or specifically died there. And it's not outside the realm of possibility that it's just not showing up because, again, it was a jail for a long time. So there could be unrecorded instances there. Now, oh, that's so weird. Okay, so this is supposed to be the picture of the old jail cells, which are down in the basement of this building. I got to tour it back in 2018 and took this picture of the jail cell, but of course that's not showing up right now. So great. Let's see if this shows up at all. Can you see it now? Nothing? Okay. What about this one? Is that one showing up? Oh my gosh. Okay, we'll see. We'll see if this comes back online. Oh my gosh, the jail cells are still down there, right? And now that the building is being renovated, I have a lot of positive, hope what's going to turn out down there. But they were just horrifying shadow cells down there, unlit, windowless, subterranean holding cells. And they've had all sorts of prisoners pass through over the years. Let me pull this bad boy up again here. When I was in the building, just walking through it, I have a whole like virtual video tour of me going through the building there, and you can hear something like knocking behind me everywhere I go through the building. And I was really curious. I was like, where's Gus? I gotta find him because I'd like heard about him all the time. Here's an article about Gus in the building when that restaurant opened up in the basement down there. And then this particular restaurant featured here was actually in the Clock Tower. Now, the Clock Tower restaurant was the one that had Gus frequently come into their space, throw around their stuff, knock down glasses, and throw bottles. But the basement is the one where people have talked about feeling the most negative energy. So I couldn't help myself, right? You know me. I had to investigate more. And the only like fatality that was really well published inside that building was a janitor. In the early days of Old City Hall opening for the city, it had a janitor who was crushed to death in the elevator shaft. Let's see if I can bring the article up for you here. Okay, well, good. This one works. So Robert Spalding, 1909, was the day janitor for the City Hall building. And he was in the bottom of the elevator shaft with the freight elevator, taking cargo and boxes off of this, when a elevator operator up on the taller floor, Charles Johnson, forgot that he was in there and then started operating the elevator. And Robert got sucked in and crushed in between the elevator and the timbers that separated the basement from the rest of the floor, actually in the shaft itself. And by the time they figured out what was going on, they brought the elevator back down, but he had been crushed to death, his head in particular. And that elevator continuously was the part of this building that gave them the most problems. It would operate by itself, and in the basement down there by the jail cell level, from inmates to security guards up through 2018, people continuously said that they would have someone in the basement of that structure just like messing with them. And for me, I think Spalding is the most likely candidate. Being crushed to death by an elevator shaft is no way to go, and certainly could leave some unresolved issues down in the basement there. Now, is he Gus? I don't know. That remains undetermined. But Robert did have a reputation for being somewhat of a playful scoundrel, and certainly Gus as a ghost has had more stories about him just being kind of a scamp and not necessarily someone with violent intent, a lot like you might expect from one of the prisoners down there. So I'd say you could take that to the bank. Speaking of which, let's talk about Puget Sound National Bank building. This was constructed in 1910, and at the time, it was the tallest building west of the Missouri River. And while Tacoma would go on to build taller ones, this was the one that was most famous for a period of time here. And it was, I think, insinuated into the imagination of people throughout the area here for a long time because of the death that happened there fairly early on. And shockingly enough, it was another elevator related incident. Now, the ghost story that's been attached to this is that people who have worked in this building have had moments where they get onto the elevator and then it will just suddenly drop. Not very far, only like a few feet, or it'll feel like it will to them, but the doors will open and it won't have moved at all. But multiple people have had instances where they felt that sensation of the elevator, like just going shoop and getting a little bit of lurch before it drops down. No bueno. Not good for me. I'm not interested in that, not one bit. But the hallways, too, have had a repeat occurrence. This is the auxiliary building that was built in 1921 for bank president Chester Thorne. And that's going to be important for us later. Don't get sidebarred by it now, but remember Chester Thorne and his prominence in the area, because this will come back around, I promise. This building and the very tall one next to it have had this story for years now, that people are walking down a hallway and they'll hear someone just go, "Hey!" And when they turn around and look, it looks like there's just a dark outline of a person, almost like this guy in the hat down here at the bottom of the picture, crossing in front of the automobile. Like, just enough features that you can make out it's a person, but not enough to really see what they look like. And he often bears a striking resemblance to this guy. This is Charles L. Andrews, who died when he fell from the 12th floor. The elevator operator, Neil Weber, was taking Charles up to the top of the building at that time, and according to his account that he delivered to authorities, was waiting for Neil to get to the back of the elevator. And at that time, the elevator, of its own volition, lurched upwards. And Charles here dropped straight down the shaft. Police report at the time thinks that every bone in his body was broken as he landed down there on the bottom. And Neil Weber, the elevator operator, his story was corroborated by the second operator, Constance McClure, who had for months now been saying that of its own will, the elevator would sometimes just lurch upwards, leaving a very dangerous gap for people to fall through. But it didn't happen until Charles here actually dropped down to the elevator shaft and died. When he did, right, this now starts this like mythos, this legend of him haunting the building. But there have been lots of occurrences inside there where people say same thing, elevator shaft all the time, or that people get called in because there's a cry for help that comes from the bottom of the elevator shaft. That they come into the building because they hear someone stuck inside that building. Or the one that really got me is I've heard that sometimes the safety operators, right, the people who answer the phone when you're in the elevator, if there's an emergency, have said that they've gotten a call and then dispatched authorities there to get the elevator open. They arrive in the middle of the night, nobody inside the building. But they have, I think someone has a transcript of one of these calls of someone being like, "Hello, I'm trapped in the elevator. I need your help." And then they just start weeping uncontrollably, nothing else. When they arrive, nobody's there. The rest of the building has also had a whole bunch of experiences to it, in particular, the main bank floor, and then for me, the vault. The vault first caught my eye as a completely unrelated story because people were saying that there might have been a theft or something in the area and that things would be rearranged inside the bank vault when the bank employees would arrive the next day, and that the vault hadn't been opened in the middle of the night. It still had remained sealed. Nobody had seen anything in there, but inside that locked vault, pieces would move around. For me, I'm like, yeah, seriously, no thank you, stairs all the way, right? I'm just making sure everyone's, yeah. Elevators, have a terrifying history here. One of the places that, I mean, actually, I'm going to say one, but there are multiple old buildings in Tacoma that have elevator ghost stories attached to them. These are the two that I know had fatalities. So as you're cruising around the area and thinking to yourself, maybe I don't want to get in the elevator, trust your instincts. Stadium High School. Stadium High School, I have been doing tours of that building for years, and I consistently believe that that is one of the most haunted structures in the area for a variety of reasons. But I've been on tours where originally the night engineer was like, yeah, there's a ghost in the elevator. You just thank her and it's fine. She'll take care of you. You can go wherever you need to. And I've told that story for years. And I had a tour group one time who got on the elevator, fairly small group, and they're like, there's no such thing as the ghost. And apparently somebody said something really mean to her. It was my co-guide, and the elevator got stuck. It got stuck just like on the floor, right? It's like they reached their destination, but the door wouldn't open. We eventually had to pry it open, right? And as it got to the point where it was just open enough for people to come, it slid shut like something really strong. I put it, and we had like emergency key, emergency lever, everything. For me, there's no reason. There's no reason to risk it. Like if someone tells you an elevator's haunted, just go with it. Oh, this is a great question. The McMenamins elevator. McMenamins, that Elks Temple from 1916, is a place that has historically not had any haunted activity reported in it. But since the McMenamin brothers and their team filled it with all this paraphernalia of Tacoma's most notable people, with stories unresolved and beyond, it has become like a hotbed for visiting activity. And not dissimilar to, let's see if I can pull it back up here for you again, the safe at the bottom of the Puget Sound National Bank building. Things just go missing or get rearranged in the middle of the night, and then they're always inside locked rooms, you know? Which, speaking of cool bank vaults, just as a sidebar here, the Astor Building. This is the historic Washington building downtown. It was originally constructed in 1925. It has been used for a variety of things, but currently it is the Astor, and it is an apartment building. It's been retrofitted. And in the basement of this, they have the original vault used for this building, which has now been transformed into this, the Lock and Key Lounge, which is a speakeasy for residents. So it's got a little bar in here inside the old bank vault, and you can go in there and have a drink with your buddies in swanky 1920s secret style, if that's your thing. And obviously it's your thing. That's the coolest thing ever. Let's talk about the Masonic Temple. The Temple Theater, a former Masonic lodge with a theater inside of it, was built in 1927. And for years, it has had a whole slew of ghost stories attached to it. Now, the theater itself is extraordinary. It had a seating capacity of 1,800 people. And I'm not saying anyone's competing for this, the widest proscenium arch of any theater in the region. People are like, wow, size of your arch says a lot, I guess. But this building has had all sorts of ghost stories in it, most of them kind, not a ton of them malicious. This is right in Tacoma today. It's just alongside the Stadium District, essentially, kind of kitty corner to First Presbyterian Church there. And you can see the original designs for the structure. Absolutely stunning. Now, the ghosts of this building are most frequently seen either up on that top balcony or looking through a window near that front door, looking out at people. But people talk all the time about the stage, that there's a ghost that comes out on the stage and then shoves people, essentially. That actors have been on stage and they've been accused of tripping or missing a line, but then they've sworn for years now that somebody came out and shoved them. Now, if you don't know, this is kind of the origin of the ghost light. Theaters are notoriously haunted, and there's a variety of reasons for this. Number one, ghosts and actors go hand in hand. They're like meant to be together. But both are also superstitious crowds. And so it's believed that the ghosts of actors often come back to the stages where they perform the most because they're suckers for attention. And to avoid angering them, you leave a ghost light out. So if you've ever been in a theater after hours, usually there is a single bare bulb light left out on the stage, and that's to illuminate the stage for the ghosts to come back and visit it. For the Temple Theater, they do keep a ghost light down there, and it has been the site of multiple investigations over the years, including in 1983 with local psychic Lou Johnson, pictured here. Lou often would go around investigating different sites throughout the Tacoma area, and she very much believed that the like epicenter of activity out here was the Temple Theater, and that it was more than just a building that was haunted, but that there was something about it that was a focal point or a gateway or a ley lines, that there was something about that space where it was constructed that attracted more paranormal energy and allowed them to sort of breach the barrier between the living and the dead. This was something that Lou was very passionate about. And as an avid investigator throughout the region there, this was something that she put forward and then people began to run with for a long time there. The Temple Theater itself, built by Masons, was always shrouded in a level of secrecy. And I believe Theodore Roosevelt was in town as a famous Mason himself to lay the cornerstone of that structure. And if it wasn't this one, it was a different one very nearby. But there's something about that space that has often attracted some of the darker or more palpable stories in the region there. If you have the opportunity to go, you should check it out. And yes, for the most part, Wilkeson sandstone. As with all the great structures in the area there, Wilkeson sandstone is the stuff that they built really good things out of. Oh, what was the speakeasy in Olympia called? Gatsby's? I remember going there. That place was fantastic. We're going to try the fog machine here again, my friends. Historically, when I've done this on ghost tours, it's set off the smoke alarms. So let's see how this goes. But I want to give you guys that spooky ambiance for the tour today. It may not turn off though, so let's see. Hold on. Oh no. Totally fine. Shall we continue with some of my most favorite stories? Let's, they said. Wonderful. So the Temple Theater has a lot of activity to it. One of the ghost stories that I don't think gets nearly enough attention in this region is of the Connor Hound. Now, if you're not familiar with this, sorry, it sounds like something's trying to get in my room right now. I'm sure that's fine. The Connor Hound is the story of Fern Hill. Fern Hill is, well, it used to be its own independent site that was later annexed into the city of Tacoma. But Fern Hill is on the southern edge of where Tacoma is today. It's marked by one of these fantastic, this used to be for the streetcar that ran all the way down there, this brick station there, which is now used for storage, I believe. But Fern Hill is a tiny little neighborhood, and for decades, also, I will clear the air here really quick. Yes, maybe, but I promise tonight, I promise there are no jump scares. And here's why. I love jump scares in virtual ghost tours more than anything. But quite a few people have reached out to me and said that they really enjoy watching the ghost tours, but that they have PTSD or a variety of things that prevent them from watching it if there's a whole bunch of jump scares in it. So tonight, I'm on my absolute best behavior. I promise, no jump scares, only scary stories. Here we go. Brick building, Fern Hill. For years, there has been a ghost story down there of people hearing just this blood-curdling, horrible howl. And when they look behind them, there's this dog. just black shadow, silhouette, looks like it's completely shrouded in darkness, right? Maybe backlit, but that its eyes are glowing the way that a dog's eyes do when like a light gets into it at nighttime, right? And most people run. They freak out, they run, or if they're walking their dog or something, the dog starts panicking before they hear this. Like they have this moment of intense dread, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's this shadow dog behind them. And that when it starts going, when it starts howling, there's this chorus of dogs, all of them at once going up, like there's a siren or something in the area that's just out of earshot, but every dog hears it. And this comes from the early days of Fernhill, when back in 1924, a guy named Richard Connor walked into the police station and reported that his wife, Pearl, had gone missing. He told them that he had dropped her off at her parents' house and driven up to the home, let her out of the car, said that he'd come see her later, and then she just vanished. And her parents said that she had never arrived. The police start looking into this, and everywhere they start investigating, nobody's seen anything of Pearl Connor. She's absolutely vanished from the face of the earth. And they start looking deeper into the story to maybe see if she had any reason to leave, had a place that she might have gone. And lo and behold, Richard Connor, her husband, pictured here in the middle with Pearl on the left, isn't spending much time nervous about his wife's safety, not grieving her loss, but in fact spending a lot of his time with the woman Frances MacArthur, pictured here on the right. Frances MacArthur, Richard Connor, Pearl Connor. And that gets the police suspicious, but there's nothing to suggest that he did anything, just that she's absolutely gone. And it's not until Ione Holt gets involved. Now, Ione here was good friends with Pearl Connor, and she decides that she's going to play amateur sleuth and look into this story. So she goes to Richard and starts giving him a lot of romantic attention and acting like she might be interested in spending more time with him. And then offers, this is the crazy part, she's like, well, listen, I know people are suspicious about you. How would it be if I wrote a letter as if I were Pearl and sent it to her family, being like, hey, don't worry, I'm on a road trip. I went down to see friends in California. I'm completely fine. And Richard's like, oh, I love this idea. That's a great plan. I'll give you some letters that you can use as handwriting samples so that you really get it right. Ione does this. She writes letters as if she were Pearl. One of them's pictured here, then sends it to California, where she has a relay person post it and then mail it back up to Washington to Pearl's parents. Right? It's getting crazy. At some point, she gets the level of trust with Richard where she's like, listen, oh my God, this door is freaking me out today. She gets to the point where she's like, I just need some assurances, right? That this isn't going to come back and bite me. Like, where is Pearl? Where did she go? Like, is she going to show up and accuse me of plagiarizing these letters? And Richard says, well, you don't have to worry about her. She's 40 feet down. So Ione immediately goes to the authorities and tells them what Richard's been saying. And they figure out that a local well on the site of Joint Base Lewis McChord today is the most likely location because it was a notorious one in the area that was specifically 40 feet down. Authorities go, open up the well, and on the misty morning when they do it, everybody in Fernhill said that Pearl's dog started inconsolably howling. It just wouldn't stop, and that soon every dog in the neighborhood was going, and they couldn't get them, like, stop. All the dogs just kept going off, and that as that was happening, the authorities were dragging Pearl Connor's body out of the well. For weeks after this, it goes into a major overdrive where now they have a huge trial. because it happened on federal property, Richard now is a federal case. And so he ends up getting sentenced to life for murdering his wife. And in a weird twist, Ione actually goes on to leave her husband and marry the prosecuting attorney that she was working with to be like a detective. And Connor for years was saying that he kept having these nightmares about Pearl showing up and like demanding vengeance. The woods outside JBLM and all around Fern Hill, though, are the area where people have reportedly seen a woman matching Pearl's description, walking around as if she's disoriented or lost in the woods. And that on multiple occasions where people have gone to like ask for help, to see if she needs anything, that they say one or two dogs, all black, glowing eyes, come after them and pursue them until they leave the site. This has happened for years. And it's always the same accounts for people of seeing these shadow dogs and then most specifically hearing the sound, that it's that howl that follows people around. And I encountered a story in the 1970s where some girls who were living down in Fern Hill were having like a sleepover at their house. And one of the girls said that there was like a knocking on the door and that they heard these dogs howling all around the house. So they looked out the window to see what was going on. And it looked like there was a woman standing in front of the house, soaking wet, shivering, and asking for help. And the girl just had a bad feeling. She's like, nope, 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 nope. So she went to get her parents who are upstairs. They come back down. Her dad opens the door. Nobody's out there. No like puddle, no wet footprints, nothing like that in front of the house. So he's like, oh my gosh, these girls, they're messing with me. But that young girl said that that night when they were all up in her room, there was a knocking on the window and it looked like the eyes of that woman looking in. And she just said, little girl, will you help me? And they freaked out, which is absolutely the appropriate response for that situation there. Which leads me to the Jake Bird hex. What is going on tonight, guys? Every time I try and show you a picture of the City Hall jail cells, this is what we get. And I have no idea what's going on with that. Horrible. Okay, here we go. Well, first of all, yeah, Richard Connor does deserve the absolute worst that could be given. So we're going to talk about Jake Bird now and hope that any of these show up. Does this one show? Oh, what is happening? Every time I do one of these ghost tours, something weird happens. And so I'm just taking this as the sign that this has got to be the right one we need to talk about. Yeah, by all means, if you guys need to go visit this jail, wait till they open it here soon and indulge yourself. Yeah. So if you don't know this house, this is basically on the corner of 21st and I Street, sort of in the Hilltop Zone. It was the home of a woman named Bertha Clute and her daughter Beverly June, back in 1947. And Bertha was yet another widow. I don't know what it is about widows for me tonight. I was like, that's a good theme for a ghost experience. But this home has been on the market forever. Anytime someone flips it, buys it, sells it, it is almost immediately dismissed. Nobody wants to live in this. Nobody stays in there for long. And when I first took this picture of it, I think it's cleaner and gray now. It was being discussed that a local church might buy this, raise it to the ground, and then use it to build a new property out there. But nothing ever happens with it. I start digging into it, and sure enough, there are a whole variety of stories attached to this home, but most of them are about a ragged breathing. The people will be standing in their kitchen in the middle of the night, and they'll just feel like that tingly sensation where the hair on your arms goes up, and that they'll hear what sounds like someone gasping for air, or that they're gurgling on something, like almost choking, and that it feels like it's right behind them when it happens. The other thing that people have talked about with this house is that you could see the little attic section there. that there are footsteps walking in the middle of the night, and that what sounds like something drops. And people have had, storage or things up there. They've had to go check on the attic. Never anything out of place, but it always sounds like something really heavy drops down and then breaks. The reality of this home is honestly even more terrifying than just the stories associated with it. Because on October 30th, 1947, another October widow, Beverly and June were at home when a man broke into the house and with an axe completely dismembered them. This guy was named Jake Bird, and there just happened to be two officers in the area who respond to this incident, and they arrest Jake Bird and take him in. And Jake, the trial is an absolute story in and of itself. But he ends up getting convicted for the murder of these two women. And then he's given an opportunity to speak where he decries his trial as unjust. And he says that he is going to put on the Jake Bird hex, that anybody who has anything to do with his conviction is going to die before him. He's sentenced to be executed, and a year goes by, right? And in that time, this number just starts to grow, right? The amount of people that are confirmed that he murdered reaches 44. And the amount of people who die while he's waiting to be executed eventually reaches 6. It was, I'm trying to remember all of them here. Definitely the judge. Edward Hodge was the Pierce County Superior Court judge who died of a heart attack in January of 1948. Joseph Karpak, the underage sheriff, died in April of 1948, heart attack. George Harrigan, Pierce County reporter who covered the trial, died in June 1948. Sherman Lyons was the detective lieutenant who interrogated Jake Bird, October 1948. James Selden, Jake Bird's defense attorney that was assigned to him, that Jake Bird specifically was like, this guy was out to get me and never gave me a fair trial, dies November 1948, also a heart attack. And then Arthur Stewart, the Washington State Penitentiary guard assigned to the death row inmates, dies right before Jake Bird is executed. All told, 6 people that were deeply involved specifically with Jake Bird that he denounced by name end up dying of heart attacks in that year leading up to his eventual execution. And yes, this guy he worked from Louisiana all through the country as a railroad laborer until he eventually arrived here in Tacoma, where he was caught and kept underground City Hall in that jail cell. If you've been to the federal building on A Street, that is one of the places where the trial was taking place. Jake Bird, absolutely astounding part of it. And all right, I'm going to see if I can actually get you a picture of the jail cells down here. Oh man, it's working. So the cells where he was kept are still down there today. Oh, what? So it's just the background on this one. The actual, some more pictures of the cells. They absolutely won't show up tonight. What a weird thing. I have no idea, my friends. Well, you can Google it. I'll send them. I'll put them up on Facebook. The pictures of old City Hall jail cells that I took. Oh, man. I hate it. Here, let's try this. I have a clip that I've kept of the basement of old City Hall that I can share with you here. Let's see if that works. So that's the other thing. People that used to patrol that building said that they would sometimes see a shadowed or silhouetted person in the hallway and then go to confront them and they wouldn't be there. Or most disturbingly, that they would get down on their hands and knees, crawl away down a hallway, and then they wouldn't find them later. And this is the basement where that guy was crushed to death in the elevator shaft. I'm glad that worked. I have no idea why none of the pictures are showing up. That's horrifying. Fantastic. Oh, here was a good one. Are they going to be opening this up to the public? Yes, I believe so. I'm not sure specifically what's going to go into the basement of Old City Hall now that they're refurbishing it. But I do know that their intention is to keep that ambiance of the jail cells, maybe not so grungy, but to make them accessible to the public out there. And yeah, I did. When the city offered me the opportunity to tour Old City Hall, I was like, oh, like a liaison, and I will go through and we can document stuff. Nope. They meant, enjoy, Chris, take your camera and wander around for a couple hours, which was awesome, but also definitely one of the creepiest things that's happened to me in a long time. Ugh, hate it. But here's a good one. Let's see if these ones work. Thornwood Castle. Now, Thornwood Castle consistently remains one of the most talked about haunted locations in this area here, and I feel like I've never discussed it with you guys. But the local legend is that Chester Thorne, you may remember him from earlier, owning that bank with the vault down in the bottom, that Chester Thorne had this built early on, and that he had it as a reconstructed English castle, that this was a full estate over in England, that he had disassembled brick by brick, and everything from the wood to the windows to the bricks was brought over here to Washington State, where it was painstakingly numbered and reassembled. There's a lot to suggest, in fact, almost an overwhelming amount of evidence to say that that is in fact not true at all. And it's difficult to pinpoint where that urban legend began. But there's a recent paper from a historian in the area that came out recently where she goes through and details all of the materials used for this building. And while it's true that some pieces of wood were brought over from England or that they imported some pieces of it, the idea that it was an entirely assembled English, manner that was brought over is false. Now, does that mean it's not cool? No. It's one of the coolest places ever. And today it's used as a bed and breakfast wedding venue. And as far as iconic mansions of the area, this is a big one. It is a 31,000 square foot building that has a variety of rooms, doors, and interestingly, chimneys, although quite a few of them are purely decorative. They don't actually go to anything. They're just there to look good, not unlike myself. Now, Stephen King's Rose Red was filmed there. This is a mini series. I think the latter half of 2000, and then they used a couple other locations in the Seattle, Tacoma area. But this first came out in January of 2002 on ABC. And if you haven't seen it, it's fantastic. And I think they're re-airing it again right now. But this is what it looked like when it was being used for Rose Red. And it does a really good job, I think, of showcasing the excellent qualities of this as a haunted home. And there are all kinds of stories attached to this place, but most of them are of people that don't recognize that they're dead. That the light will change or the temperature will change, and then suddenly a hallway, a ballroom, the dining hall will just be filled with people. The sounds, the smells, the movement, as if a huge party was going on. And then as quickly as they appeared, they vanish. And that for decades, that's been the thing, that people have had that same experience, that they'll be walking through, they'll hear almost like a big party happening, and then go through the doors, nothing. And in that instance, the room will be intensely cold. The other thing that the owners and the staff have had to deal with over decades is that the light bulbs will come unscrewed. that you'll have to walk around the house at times just doing maintenance and screwing light bulbs back in because something's wandering around there, taking them out, trying to save electricity, I suppose. Now, the staircase remains one of my favorite parts of the whole thing, and definitely gets a lot of like ghost stories attached to it. But if you have the opportunity to go and stay at Thornwood Castle and experience the Chester Thorne and his family ghost yourself, you absolutely should. Now, here's where things get weird, and I don't have enough of this story yet to speak to you really decisively on it, but there's a missing Chester Thorne element that I'm intrigued by because he frequently had moments like this attached to him, right? He was the port commissioner, right? He's responsible for Port of Tacoma. He had Thornwood Castle built, and then there was the legend that it was reassembled brick by brick from a European castle. Or the totem pole. Do you guys remember the totem pole? We used to have the world's largest totem pole for a while in downtown Tacoma, and that was a gift from Alaskan tribal members who carved it as a tribute to Tacoma. But that was actually just carved by some white dudes on Vashon Island. And so there's always this like Chester Thorne moment I've noticed where the story that gets told again and again doesn't really have a huge basis in reality. But Eyes of the Totem, one of the most terrifying films I've ever seen, even though I don't think it was intended to be, was filmed here in Tacoma and focuses both on the Thornwood Castle and the totem pole. And it's the only silent film in the area here that hasn't been destroyed by fire over the years. So I'm hot on the trail, but there's something, I'm not going to disparage anyone, but there's just something off about the Chester Thornwood story where like he did so much good in the area, but there's just a missing piece that doesn't quite line up somewhere. But if you want a haunted mansion, might I recommend the Rust Mansion? And if you're interested, this is currently for sale, my friends. I think it's very modestly priced for what it is, which is an enormous mansion with a ballroom, faithfully, historically reproduced, not reproduced, what's the word I'm thinking of? Refurbished. And this is the home of Mr. William Rust originally. Now, if you don't know Mr. William Rust, he's the founder of Ruston, who brought this smelting operation here to Tacoma. And he had this, also from Wilkinson Sandstone, constructed for his family here. And William Rust was just a magnet for tragedy, right? Like, he was 7 years old when his mother died, and he witnessed the death of his mother. He then later goes on to get married pretty early on in life, but his wife succumbs to tragedy and dies in childbirth along with his daughter. So eventually he remarries the wife that he would be with for the end of his days. But his son, Howard, was born with a heart condition and ends up dying over in the Hanford area in eastern Washington when an artery erupts inside him. And the family wasn't even there for it. Allegedly, they were off in Europe at the time and had to get news of their oldest son's death. And when they came back from that trip, they left this. The official story is that the heartbreak was too grand for the home, and so they had to leave it because they didn't want to linger in this place with the ghosts and the memories. So they end up moving into this, their second mansion, which this is on Yakima today. I don't know if this one is for sale right now. It comes on and off the market, but this is the smaller version of the Rust Mansion, believe it or not. But the Rust Mansion itself, after the family leaves, continues to just be mired in tragedy because then not long after that, due to intestinal complications, William Rust dies. And then their younger son dies. And then Mrs. Rust herself just gives up. Her heart goes out one day because everyone associated to the Rust clan passes away pretty horrifically, and certainly in untimely deaths, leaving the Rust Mansion empty. The first person who buys it after the Rust family vacates it just doesn't enjoy it, so very quickly leaves it. But the second person to buy it is Mr. Orville Billings. And Orville Billings was a candidate for governor of Washington. He was a wealthy investor and railroad tycoon here in Washington state. And he was at dinner in the dining room of the Rust Mansion with his friend and his wife. And depending on whose story you believe, he either started laughing, said something, and then shot himself in the head, or he accidentally shot himself in the face while cleaning his revolver at dinner. One account comes from the dear friend. The other account comes from his wife in her official statement to the insurance company. So, all I'm saying is, you can take whichever one you want. Now, it's worth noting that Orville Billings, that night that the revolver fired into his face, intentionally or not, was the night before his trial, because he had just been accused of having illicit, inappropriate relationships with a 14-year-old girl. So, take what you will. What we know, though, for certain, is that Orville Billings died inside that home, and that he wasn't the last. Over the years, the Rust Mansion had been used for a variety of purposes. At one point, a recovery center, and then apartment building for a very long time, before being refurbished recently, and now it could be your private mansion. I think it's what, like 3.9 million? Definitely. There we go. Oh, 3.25. Oh, is this for the second one? Still, listen, in this housing market, just go big, because no matter what, it's going to be pricey. For us, I think those are our big ones for tonight. If you guys have questions or comments, feel free to let me know. And as always, if you enjoyed your tour, you can go to the front page of Pretty Gritty Tours, where we have a little PayPal button. You can always tip your guide. It's appreciated, but not necessary. I want to thank you guys for all the generous support across the years and for sticking with me all this time and just sharing the absolute best that this region has to offer. Well, maybe best is the wrong word for tonight, but certainly the most memorable. If you guys have great ghost stories, always feel free to share them with me. I'm curious to learn. And for the rest of you, enjoy, get on out there, keep on exploring. I'll see you soon.